Well, how's everyone doing? Today is the day after some quite momentous news. As you may or may not know, Donald Trump was indicted. And to me, I say that he's got indicted for the big one. And when I say big one, I'm speaking of trying to stop Americans from voting, i.e., having their vote count. But we'll get into that. And to me, in the meantime, let me say this is Bob Gumbs bringing you the Concerned Forum here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And the truth does matter. Now, what do we got going on? Well, it looks like we have about 6 indictments. The biggest ones being with Donald and with America's mayor, Rudy Tootie Giuliani. Now, some people, I don't know, feel angry. Some people feel depressed. The way I see it, I'm an American, and I see justice being done. My own personal opinion, it should have happened last year. However, the important thing right now is that it has happened. And I think that's what we should be concerned about. And you know, it's kind of funny in an ironic sort of way because the special prosecutor, he is getting Trump and his hench people on something that is really tied up, or I should say, tied into the biggest problems that we're facing right now here in America. And those are issues of race, immigration, naturalization, so on and so forth. Because this is, if I'm not mistaken, what Trump is being hit with comes from 1871. It's called the Ku Klux Klan. What is it? Ku Klux Klan statute. All right. After the Civil War, and yes, we are still dealing with issues of the Civil War, um, unfortunately. But just like a test in school, if you don't know your history, you have a very difficult time in the class. And maybe some of us should have studied our history a little bit more, and we wouldn't be in the kind of jam that we're in now. You had the first glimmer of this in 1863. That's when Lincoln put out the Emancipation Proclamation, which in essence freed all the slaves that were still held in rebel territory. Now, of course, it really didn't do that because of the fact that in parts of the South where the Union Army had not, as of yet, had reached, they kept black folks, they still continue to keep black people in slavery. But the symbolism, okay, that is what was so important because it said that was the first step in the United States saying that, you know, as a matter of fact, somebody should have called to what it was. It was actually a warning sign, letting the South know that the United States government was no longer going to be a friend of slavery because it being incompatible with our ideals. See? you hear a lot of people talk about, oh, well, other countries and nations have had slavery and all this other good stuff. Yeah, well, that's true. But remember something, the United States is different. It's a different country to everybody else in history because we are based on certain ideals which no one else has. You know, the Chinese Empire, the Roman Empire, right? Nobody. We were the ones that came up with the idea that people have a right to control their government. They have a right to say who is going to make our laws. Is it going to be at the whim of men? Or is it going to be made in such a fashion so that everybody can essentially have a say so? Everybody can put their 2 cents in. And that's what makes the whole racial issue, the whole issue about democracy, the whole thing of government, that's what makes America so special. Because we're not based like some European nations. In the last 2 centuries, you had this whole thing about blood and soil, right? We don't swing that way. That's not what America is about. Now, I know we got some very bad marks and some very horrendous, terrible things have happened. But right now, we're talking about the ideal, our mission statement, right? Which is the Declaration of Independence. And how that mission comes into fruition is through what? The Constitution, right? What leads off in the Constitution? The preamble. See? And that's what makes America so important in world history. Because we're saying, we told the world, we declared, listen, we don't need a pope, a bishop, a special family. We don't need none of that. We, the people of this country, will determine our own destiny through a set of laws. And how that destiny is set, it will be set by all American citizens equally. That's what the whole thing about voting is about. That's why voting is so important. And when I get, sick to my stomach when I hear people talk about, oh, well, I don't really get involved in politics. Well, guess what, folks? This whole business now, I see that's something else that you hear Republicans trying to use to try to worm their way out of facing the facts of what Trump and his cohorts have done. Because this ain't politics. All the folks who are testifying and who gave information on these particular charges that came down yesterday, they're all Republicans. These are people that worked for Trump, all right? Some of whom Trump handpicked himself. So anybody that wants to walk around saying, oh, well, I don't get involved in politics, or, well, this whole thing of Trump is just politics. No. It ain't, no. Politics doesn't have a damn thing to do with this. We are talking about lawbreakers. Now, they might have tried to use actually they didn't try, they did use the Republican Party as their, cover vehicle. But this is not a Republican thing, all right? What is sad is that the Republicans, they played with fire. They've been doing it for the last 35 years or so. They played with fire and they wound up getting burned. Because I seriously doubt if you're going to have a Republican Party And I tell you, quite frankly, I don't care what happens, whether he's found guilty on all, was it 37 charges or 40, no matter how many. Okay, I don't know if he's going to be found guilty, if he's going to be found innocent. I don't. I don't know if he's going to be elected president from jail. Don't know, and that's not really the issue. What I do know is that the Republican Party, as we have known it, it's dead. It is done. They allowed people to basically drag them into the gutter. And I don't think that they'll ever be able to drag themselves out of it. Quite frankly, if we were a sane democracy, the Republican Party, what is it when they close down a party because of criminal activity? Well, that's what should happen, in my opinion. That is what should happen to the Republican Party, because as you can see, it's there in black and white, and much of it out of Trump's own mouth. The head of the Republican Party has decided, or they decided, that they were going to work together and conspire to prevent groups of people from exercising their right to vote. And in areas where they couldn't actually stop people from voting, they worked to make sure that those votes were not counted. And to me, that sounds a bit like RICO. You are conspiring to do an illegal acts. And that's what we have here. But no, this is not about politics. And people need to, you need to get awake. You need to understand just what happened here. And I was telling you about this whole business, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, that was the first part, as I was saying, putting the world on notice. Hey, the United States of America is no longer a friend of slavery. And then in 1865, when the Civil War was ended, you had the situation like out in Texas. That's what we just celebrated here not too long ago, Juneteenth, because that's when the word finally got to certain areas like Texas, telling the slaves, hey, you guys are free. All right, hence comes Juneteenth. And then we go to the process of was the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. In other words, we went through the whole thing of guaranteeing the newly freed slaves, or freedmen as they were called back then, along with some other things. Hey, you guys have the right to vote. And that new organization at that time, the KluKluxKlan, went through the hills and dales of the South, basically trying to stop black people not only from voting but also from running for public office. Because at that time, that's when you started seeing huge amounts of blacks in states like South Carolina run for the state assembly and win. And do you know that the best legislation that the South had up until 1967, 68, you had when the state governments were integrated, blacks were allowed to vote and hold public office. For example, the ability for poor working class white kids to be able to get a basic public school education. You didn't really see a big push on education in the South until after the Civil War. But of course, people like what's his name, Mr. DeSantis down there in Florida, he won't tell you that. And be honest about it, The reason that he doesn't tell you about that is because he probably doesn't know, which is a shame for a guy supposed to be a Harvard lawyer. But see, that's the situation that we are looking at. A lot of killings, shootings, lynchings, and not just of black people, but a lot of whites who actually came down to help and to administer the Freedmen's Bureau, the Reconstruction in the South, and what have you. So, as you probably know, Lincoln was assassinated in '65. One of the few big public mistakes that Lincoln made was when he selected Andrew Johnson to be his vice president. I mean, I could see the crack that he was in because Johnson was from Tennessee and he had remained loyal to the Union. The thing is that, like many whites at that time, working class, poor whites, they were incredibly racist, and unfortunately, some of that feeling still lingers, and that is what the ruling class of the South, the old Bourbons, the old bourgeois, right? That's the tool that they used to keep the black and whites separated, the working class. See, and Johnson, unfortunately, was he was one of those working bees, put it that way, ignorant, uneducated, and basically, like I say, he got into politics, and come the Civil War, he decides to stick with the Union. Unfortunately, he never left his racism at home. So after he takes over when Lincoln's assassinated, he does everything he can to try to end Reconstruction. And there was a constant battle between him and the Republican-dominated House of Representatives and Senate. And you have to remember that back in those days, the Republicans were the good guys. I know it sounds strange now looking at today's Republican Party, but when we're talking 1867, 68, we are talking the Republicans were the good guys. Okay? Don't ever forget that. It finally got to the point where they tried to get Johnson impeached, which would have been the right thing to do. Unfortunately, the impeachment proposal failed by one vote, and didn't make that much of a difference because the next election, Johnson was voted out ingloriously. Okay, and who becomes the next president? Well, who else? The hero, U.S. Grant. That's right. And the Ku Klux Klan had, like I said, they were running, throughout the South, shooting, burning, lynching folks, burning schools, especially those little black schools that were put up by the former slaves so that they could educate themselves. And you would have a child as young as 5, and I hate to use the term old, probably because I'm getting older myself, but you would have somebody put it this way, from 5 to 95, sometimes in the same little one-room schoolhouse. And the Klan would routinely burn these little schoolhouses down, things like that. Some guy wants to run for Congress. Klan didn't like that. Somebody wants to run for the state assembly. Klan didn't like that. So you had a lot of killing and burning going on. And finally, old Grant says, well, the hell with this. We just fought the war behind this nonsense. And yes, it was behind slavery. Didn't start out that way. Okay? You hear that, Governor DeSantis? The Civil War did not start out to end slavery. Make sure you know that, right? But what did happen, by the time we get to the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863, well, actually, to tell you the truth, you could say, oh, when was that? The Battle of Antietam, September of 1862, that time frame. By the time we had gotten to that era, that time frame, I should say, intelligent people recognized that the United States could not be put back the way it was before, where you had free states and slave states. It wouldn't work. It didn't make any sense. And what happened, the Ku Klux Klan, basically, they was about trying to return everything to the antebellum era. In other words, back to 1860. And they felt the best way to do this was to basically stop black people from voting and especially stop black people from holding office. It got to the point, as I was getting ready to say, that Grant finally said, to hell with this. We didn't fight this war to see this type of madness come back into our lives, into the lives of our country. What happened? Well, put it to you like this. Ulysses Grant was the only American elected official that actually broke the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, getting your butt chewed out. The whole person got chewed out. Grant literally destroyed them. And that's where you get this, the KKK, what was it? Bill or KKK amendment. But in 1871, he signed it. It was made the law. And it did a pretty good job with the organized KKK. Chased them out of existence. They didn't raise their ugly heads back until, when was it, about 19, when was Birth of a Nation, that movie? Somewhere, 1913 and 1915. That's when the Klan made a resurrection. Before that, when you had Jim Crow being introduced, we're talking about the late 1880s going into the 1890s with Plessy versus Ferguson, where blacks were denied the opportunity to ride where they want on the train or on streetcars and what have you. But you have to remember, that was done with the help of a lot of folks from the South, a lot of your writers basically writing about the good old days before the Civil War, when the darkies knew their place and were happy and friendly. Okay? And that is who was really responsible for Jim Crow. Because you have to remember, the South, talking in 1865, a lot of their manpower was gone. All right? I mean, what is it? They lost something like about over half of young white men. I mean, you're talking guys like from 18 to 40. Most of those guys, half of those guys were gone, dead, see? And what the folks in the South figured was that for a time they would have to win the propaganda war. And to a large extent they did, because as you can see now, you have this damn fool DeSantis and that other idiot in Texas walking around saying, hey, well, slavery wasn't that bad. Blacks learned a lot, which was another lie. But conservatism is essentially based upon a lie. That's when I see somebody talking about black conservatives, I want to laugh my butt off, quite frankly. Um, you have a, you got a situation where basically people are saying, well, we need to go forward. Time marches on. You ever hear anybody talking about a watch going backwards? Right? Time does not march backward. But yet, conservatives, to a large extent, uh, that's what they say, that we should basically not go anywhere, that things should remain the same. Or if there is any type of change, then it should be glacial, real slow. See, that's what conservatism is about, right? And essentially, that's what happened with race relations in this country up until the Great Depression. Well, excuse me, uh, up until what they call the Roaring Twenties, and then we go into the Great Depression. But this is the damage. This is an example of the damage that the South has caused when you talk about the whole issue of race relations. Because see, it didn't just extend to black folks. Okay, I mean, what about the indigenous people? What about Native Americans, Hispanics, Italians, and for a good period of time, what about the Irish? This whole racial thing, and yeah. I hear some Southerners out there now screaming, "Well, the North was bad too." Yeah, we know that. We know that. We know that you got huge fortunes today built upon my back, upon the back of black folks descended from Africa. Um, that's just a fact of life. It's not about trying to say, well, I want you to feel guilty. That's something else that really enrages me about this guy, DeSantis, because he talks this nonsense that, oh, well, I don't want you to teach anything in school that will make white folks feel, make that white kid, make him feel bad or make him feel guilty. Hey, man, I'm not responsible for how this kid feels. What the hell did you teach him at home? Okay? That will do a lot to determine how he feels about himself when these type of issues are discussed. But goddamn, we're Americans. We fought fascism in Europe and won. We fought communism on the world stage. And essentially, we won. But you mean to tell me that you are scared to teach for your kids to learn history? Oh, that is just so much nonsense. And people need to, get woke and grow up. Okay? We definitely need to do that. And that's why people like DeSantis have no business holding public office. Because you want people that are going to take you into the future. But you are not going to go into the future by hiding your past. It doesn't make any sense. Unless you are planning to do racism, unless you are planning to do wrong. And see, this is the situation we have here. And take a look at Florida, by the way. The whole state is crumbling. Try buying a house down there and getting it insured, okay? That's all I'll say at this point. But there seems to be, I don't know, a love for autocracy. I think that's one of the problems that you have in the South as opposed to the rest of the country. This yearning for autocracy for a strong man, for a strong Christian man to make it all right. That is a stigma of the South. And that's a stigma that's left from being a society that has tried to do everything it can to justify one human being owning another. See, when somebody says New England, right, especially when you're talking in political terms, well, the first thing that pops in my head, the New England town meeting, where the citizens get together to discuss the issues that affect the community as a whole, right? That's what I think of when I think of New York. Um, well, yeah, northern New York, but particularly New England, which is opposed to the South, because in the South you have the plantation owner and you have his slaves. The white guy, all right, who's poor, his only hope or salvation would be to obtain land, obtain some slaves, and see what he could do with that. That was his path to success. And that it was so totally different from what we had here in the North. Now, neither South nor North were, how should I say, um, you know, in terms of race relations, uh, neither one, North or South, were what you would call enlightened. Although I will say there was a little more enlightened in the North than it was in the South, right? But the whole, how should I say, the whole cultural, social dynamic, it's totally different. Even in terms of how white people dealt with each other. Now, DeSantis, he runs his mouth about, yeah, slavery was good for blacks. Now, he's not going to say that. He's not going to say he said that. But when you're telling me that, yeah, there was good things that happened to black people in slavery. Um, they picked up skills, right? When you say stuff like that, knowing the history of race relations in this country and what we had to fight a civil war to finally end, and then for you to turn it around and say, well, there were some good aspects. Hey, man, why don't you just go ahead and get a sign with KKK on it and, stick it to your rear end? Because you might as well. Because that's what you're saying. You're saying, I am a racist. Because for you, well, let me put it to you like this. Do you think that Jews would be happy if someone said, oh, well, at least the Nazis, when they dragged them out of their homes in Poland and in Germany, and these people were dragged out of their homes in the middle of the night and, taken to concentration camps, well, at least they did get the advantage. They learned new skills. You saw Schindler's List. The Nazis had Jewish people, making locks, making armaments, weapons. that stuff, that type of work that called for precision tool making, right? So yeah, the Jews learned new skills under the Nazis in concentration camps. Now, is that something that any decent human being would say with pride? I mean, we have allowed the most ignorant ass people to take public office in in some parts of this country, for them to say such a thing. Um, would you say? I mean, I would ask DeSantis. Would you say that and agree with the governor of Louisiana, who I believe it was 1899 or 1901, said that Italians were they were a gang of thieves, and they were terrible people who were only interested in robbing their neighbor, and that they are lower than they are lower they are lower than the Negro. Now, these aren't my words. That's what that white Christian governor of Louisiana, that's the comment that he made. Was that right? Of course it wasn't right. It was a disgusting thing to say, both about blacks and Italians. Was it right? From my understanding, was it right that DeSantis' grandmother was not, she was terrified that she had to keep her pregnancy secret because there were only so many Italians allowed into the country because they were not Northern Europeans? So they didn't fall that high. They were very low on the bottom of the white person's ladder? Yes. Was that right? Yeah, and yes, that is true. Italians and for a long time Irish were not considered to be really white people. You think that kind of crap was right? Do you think it was right that indigenous Americans, Native Americans, were dragged from Georgia and Florida and North and South Carolina and Virginia? These people were dragged and forced to march thousands upon thousands of miles in the dead of winter to Oklahoma to become farmers and to learn how to farm? You think that was a good thing, Governor? I mean, I don't understand. Florida, a lot of these places like Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, you really need to take a look in the mirror and look at the type of people that you put in public office. And it's not just a question of whether or not these people are ready for prime time. I think it's a question of whether or not some of these areas are ready for the 21st century, quite frankly. That leads to something, to another point. And I know this is going to get a little touchy. All right? Let me, hang on a second, please. And yes, my little getting a sip to drink was a stall tactic. It's a stall tactic because what I'm going to say, well, let me go ahead and just say it, and y'all think what you want to think. This whole thing with Trump and talking about the Civil War and talking about race, which, by the way, well, I got this on my mind. I hate using that term race, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a bullshit term coming out of the 19th century, Um, and I call it BS because of the fact that it is BS. Because in reality, there is the whole term race and what have you is no such thing. I think any competent medical person or any competent scientist, anyone that has done any study on humanity, on human beings, and who we are and where we come from, will tell you that there's no such thing as race. Race is a social concept, okay? But if I go out here and you go out here, I happen to be black, you happen to be white, you get shot. If you and I are the same blood type, we can do a transfusion. If the question is that you need blood, or you've lost so much blood that you need a what? A transfusion, right? I can have a child with a woman of any particular color or culture because we're both human beings. So this whole thing about race, like I said, is something that originated in the 19th century when we were getting into this whole the thing about superior race crap and and stuff like that. And we really need to get out of this nonsense because if you are a religious person, then you're supposed to believe that we're all God's children. But see, that's something else that the Republican Party has put its filthy mitts on here in the United States. And when you go overseas, people notice that, you know, uh, this phony fake Christianity that has been so dominant here in America. You ask some of those preachers for Trump. Ask one of those birds. You ever, read the Bible? I'm talking about the New Testament, right? And what does Jesus exhort you to do? He says, feed the hungry, take care of the sick. I don't see that as being part of the Republican bandwagon, But hey, that's what some people choose. I just think that it's something that people need to really take a look at themselves and what it is that they profess to believe. But this nonsense about, oh, well, the human race, well, that's exactly what it is. There is only one race. It's called the human race. Everything else is just talking about culture. But again, somebody should, send Governor DeSantis, send him a memo, okay? I doubt that he would take the time to read it, but who knows? Sometimes miracles still happen. But yeah, that's this is the problem that we have in our politics, and unfortunately, the Republicans. There needs to be a school opened up for people who want to be in public life or something, because my God, these bastards are so unpopular, generally speaking. But see, the problem is that they saw this unpopularity that they have. Look at how many times Republicans have won the popular vote, and that in the last, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years. And that will show you right there. People don't like these guys. I don't know. It seems like, with the exception of Reagan, um, Republicans really don't know how to talk to working people intelligently. But what they did do, they said, well, we're going to go and we're going to get uh, some of the most ignorant bastards we could find, right? And we are going to appeal uh, to their, how would you say it? Their instincts, okay? Their primeval hates, okay? And I give the Republicans credit because they did a great job. They did a great job on basically getting Americans to hate other Americans. And that is really the only damn thing that they have accomplished since Ronald Reagan. And it's funny because in his last term, Reagan, he wasn't that bad. He wasn't all that great. Well, he wasn't that bad. He didn't turn out to be the hate monger that many people thought he would be. Unfortunately, he didn't really have that much influence on the party, believe it or not. You might hear some Republican guys, oh, I got my start in politics with Ronald Reagan and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, yeah, he did inspire some folks to get involved in Republican politics, but the problem is that he didn't really create anything lasting. Because essentially the Republican Party completely went to hell after he left the White House. Now, I give credit, Reagan and George Bush Sr., they were pretty good at keeping the real nuts in the basement, literally. Because I met a few of them when I was stationed in the White House and at the Pentagon, and I met a few of those nuts. People that have AIDS should just be taken to an island and left to die. And these were people who had responsible positions. But they had their responsible positions kind of like out of sight, basically. George Jr., right? In some respects, he came across as a decent guy, but that's where you could really see the party starting to lose control of the nut wing, okay? And after he was gone, that was it. They just went downhill, and a lot of Republicans are to blame for that. I can talk about this intelligently because I grew up in the Republican Party. My dad was a district leader in West Harlem for the Republican Party. He even ran for the Assembly as a Republican. But that was a different Republican Party. That was a Republican Party, especially here in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey Republic, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut style Republicans. They had decency. They had core decency, right? They had patriotism, and they had a core of decency. And in the final analysis, they always recognized the fact that, hey, we're the party of Lincoln. So don't give us any crap, all right? That was the Republican Party. What we have now is a embryonic fascist fascist Nazi party. I should say American fascist party. That's what you have now. And that's why I say to people, this thing with Trump, it ain't got a damn thing to do with politics. This is about one guy and his cohorts that essentially want to tear down our form of government. Because under our form of government, you cannot, how should I say, you cannot harm people. You cannot deprive people because they are of a different color or a different religion or because they don't practice sex the same way you do or because they feel that a woman has a right to handle her own, health issues in terms of uh, childbearing and what have you, right? Also, that working class people should be seen but not heard. See, we can't forget that. And they want to essentially have a country that works for them and their beliefs, but to hell with anyone else. So you're definitely talking about minority rule, minority rule. And see, that is why for anyone to sit up and think, oh, well, this is just some more political mess, that is so dangerous. As a matter of fact, uh, that's what these people, when I say these people, I'm talking about Trump and his supporters, that's what they want you to believe. Oh, well, there's just more politics. I'm not going to worry about it. Yeah, and you act like that, you think like that, and you're going to wake up and you're going to find yourself living in Hungary or you're going to find yourself living in Russia because you damn sure will not be waking up in America if Trump and his folks have their way. And that goes for Democrats and Republicans. And see, this is what we are facing. And another problem, and this is where I hope I haven't been beating around the bush too much, but look, and I say this to all Americans, but especially to my Caucasian fellow citizens. All right, I served in the military. I served with you. We have been terrified together. We have been angry together. Overseas, we went to the wrong, wrong parts of certain towns and cities together. We slept side by side, and sometimes we even cried um, when we suffered loss. I don't I don't believe that all white people in this country are racist. I don't believe that. I believe, well, I know that a lot of white people have lost their lives in the course of human freedom right here in America. We talk about slavery and everything. We also need to spend time and talk about the Underground Railroad. We need to talk about those white men and women that gave their lives to help black people escape slavery. We can talk about the slave masters and what have you. Let's not forget um, one of my favorite heroes, one of my top three heroes in the cause of human freedom. in this country, a guy named John Brown, a fellow New Yorker. Him and his sons gave their lives to try and free black folks in slavery. So don't, you can't let people like Trump and his cohorts say, oh, they're all a bunch of, and the way that he throws words together, it's like a big garbage can. They're Marxist, fascist, communist, left wing. What the hell is that? I mean, you got to keep your head on a spindle to keep up with Trump and the garbage that he talks. How a Marxist, communist, fascist, liberal, globalist? My God. I mean, for one guy to be all those people, his freaking head would explode. But please, don't buy into that. And I think the most painful thing that I have seen in the last 2 or 3 years is to see how Donald Trump has literally made suckers out of my fellow white working class citizens. He has played these poor people, and it's not right. It really isn't right to just 24 hours a day fan the flames of hatred. And a lot of those people that donate to Trump, they don't have money to do that. They really don't, but yet they do, because they think that this guy is on their side. And Donald, they asked a white woman, right? Excuse me. It's unbelievable, but they asked this white lady who was at one of his rallies. I believe they said she had like 3 or 4 kids or something. They said, why are you supporting Trump here? Because he's like me. Why? Why? Because he's white? I don't get that. I don't see how you can get that. This guy drops in on your city in his private jet with the gold toilet seats. He is nothing like you. And see, this is the poison of race and racism. To think that because this guy happens to share your skin pigment, that somehow you and he have something good going on. I wish I was, I wish I could have a chance to sit down and speak with her. And I would tell her, sweetheart, this guy doesn't give a damn about you. He don't give a damn about your past, your present, and he could give less than a damn about your future. And you need to get real and understand that. Donald Trump is one of the few people in public life that has never done a damn thing for this country, or for anyone else for that matter. That's the person that you are willing to tear a 200 and how old are we now? I think 245-year-old experiment, because that's what American democracy is, folks. It is an experiment. And I would tell that lady, ma'am, you are willing to tear down this 245-year experiment for a Donald Trump. This guy never served in the military. As a matter of fact, he thinks that people that serve in the military are suckers. Now, they've caught him saying exactly that. And those who got killed in the course, you know, of their service, they are the ultimate suckers. This is the guy that you are willing to see this country go to hell for. And that doesn't, to me, that does not only does it not make any sense, it's a tragedy. And that's the only thing that Donald Trump has ever done for America. He has brought us tragedy. Remember, this was the guy that said that a pandemic that was killing millions of people around the globe, he told us that, oh, it was a stunt cooked up by the Democrats. And I really want to ask these people, why do you think this guy gives a damn about you? He doesn't. He takes the top secret documents, the most important documents, like that thing that we're talking about with Iran. Do people out there who say they support Trump, I don't think that they realize the danger that this man has created for this country. I mean, the information that he so cavalierly passes around. What about those kids on that aircraft carrier over there in the Black Sea or in the Middle East? Excuse me. Nobody stops to think about that. I mean, do you stop to think about that? So when you talk about patriotism, how do you put his name in the sentence with patriotism? I really don't understand Trump supporters and what they do. When he had a chance to serve his country, 5 times he ran like a March hare. Okay? He was a draft dodger 5 times. And now you're going to tell me, every time he goes to one of his rallies, what's he do? He wraps himself in the flag like he's getting ready to have an orgasm. Come on, people. Come on. We're supposed to have good, basic common sense. I don't know what to tell folks when they talk about this whole immigrant issue. That is something I dumped at the feet of the Republican Party because they try to have it both ways. Their rich donors, they want the cheaper labor. Well, by the same token, their base has been told for so long that, well, the problem with your life is immigrants. Instead of educating your followers, right, the people in your districts that you represent, and telling them the basic truth about what makes an economy move, what makes it grow, you didn't do that. You basically, and this is what I would say to white working class supporters of Trump. You have allowed Trump and a very large segment of the Republican Party to treat you like fools. And this is the price that we're all paying for it. The Republican Party they treat their followers like children, little children. Most of them. I'm not all of them, but I really, it's really depressing sometimes when you sit down and think about it. But at this point in time.